Hello, this is MusicTechHelpGuy, and welcome to this Logic Pro 10 video tutorial on how to conform loops to a session tempo using the BPM counter plugin and flex time. A lot of people have been asking me about this video, or to do a video like this, because maybe you're using loops that are not Apple loops. Maybe you're using some third-party loops. Apple loops, if you get them from the Apple library, will automatically conform to your session tempo. But if you download a WAV file off the internet, sometimes there's no way of knowing what the tempo is, and sometimes not even the key of the loop. And it's difficult to try to sit there and adjust the tempo right and left just to figure out what the tempo is. So we can use a plugin called the BPM counter to sense the tempo. And then we can use flex time to adjust the playback speed of multiple loops to conform to a central tempo of our session. So to get started, I have 4 loops I'm going to be working with. So I'm going to create 4 new audio tracks. I'm going to go ahead and save my session. I'm just going to call it whatever. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to zoom out a bit just so I can see all 4 tracks. Just to let you guys know, I have a drum loop. I have a bass loop, I have sort of like a synth string sort of idea, and I have sort of like a pulsing idea. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to take all 4 of these tracks, I'm going to put them in stereo because the loops are all stereo WAV files. All right, so there's our session. My loops are out here in a folder, just labeled loops. I have a bass loop, a drum loop, a pulse loop, and a synth string loop. Now, I've in advance labeled the BPMs on all these. I know what the BPM is, but what we're going to do is we're going to imagine that we don't know what the BPM is, and we're going to figure out what the BPM of each one of these loops is by using the BPM counter. So let me just drag my drum loop on the drum track, the bass loop on the bass track, the synth string loop on the synth string track, and the pulse loop on the pulse track. All right, so I'm just going to pull all of these right to the beginning of the session, zoom in a bit, and let's just listen to the drums for now. I just happen to know offhand the drums are a bit loud, so I'm going to pull them down a little bit. Let's listen to the drum loop with the click track, and let's see, and let me actually pull the click settings up, or the click volume up by going to the metronome settings. You right click, just pull the tonality and the volume up a bit. And let's see if our drums fit in time with the session tempo, which by default in Logic is 120. Now, I know offhand it's not going to sound good because the drums are at 110, but we're going to use the BPM counter to sense that. Again, we're going to imagine that we don't know what the BPM is. So obviously, right off the bat, we can hear the drums are playing a lot slower than the session tempo. So what we're going to do is on the drum track, on the channel strip over here, we are going to assign an audio effect, an insert. It's under metering, and it's called the BPM counter, one of the simplest and probably one of the most useful plugins in Logic. All you do is you assign it to the track that you want to learn the tempo of, and you hit play. So you, basically, after you let the track play for a little while, it'll guess what the BPM is. So it's guessed it's 110. It did jump down to 109.9, but sometimes when you are dealing with tenths of a BPM, you can sort of round up and just assume that 110 was the assumed BPM, not 109.9. So what I'm going to do, at least for this session, is I'm going to use the drums as my reference tempo. So all of my other loops are going to have to conform to that reference tempo. So I'm going to change the BPM, the tempo of my session to 110. And now the drums should play right along with the click track when I turn it back on. There we go. Perfectly in time. Now, let's take a listen to the bass along with the drums. Let's see if the bass is in time with the drums. Cool. That sounds in time. It just happens to be the same tempo, but if it wasn't, we could throw the BPM counter on there and try that out. I'm just going to click on this track and hit Command R just to repeat it once. Let's move down to our synth string track here. Let's listen to this. Let me just zoom in a bit just so you can see the waveform a little bit better. Now, again, obviously I know what the tempo is. It's 92 BPM. But again, we're going to imagine for a moment that we don't know that. Let's try putting the BPM counter on this track. And I have a feeling we're going to have an issue with this one because there isn't a lot of transient heavy material. I think the BPM counter is going to have trouble sensing the tempo, but we'll give it a shot. Okay, so it wasn't able to sense a tempo. One little trick I learned with working with material that doesn't really have... I mean, you can hear the motion. It's a quarter note sort of motion. The problem is that the transients in the recording are just not hard enough for the BPM counter to pick up on. So one little trick I've used in the past is to throw, before the BPM counter, put the BPM counter down in like your second insert, and throw under Dynamics, throw the enveloper plugin on there. And with the envelope plugin, we're going to increase the attack time and the attack amount and decrease the release time just to bring more punch out of the recording. We're not going to leave it on there. We're just simply using it just to make the transients in the recording stand out more before that signal hits the BPM counter. Let's see if this has any effect on the BPM counter. Let's try that again. Let me pull the gain up even more, pull the time out even more. Let's give that another shot. Make it even more transient heavy. Still doesn't want to do it. Let's go back. Let's make the attack time a little bit longer. Let's make the release time longer. Pull the release way down. And hopefully this does it for us. There we go. Right at the very end, it was able to figure it out. So that just goes to show that sometimes it can take a little bit of finagling to get the track to do what you want it to do, to guess the BPM. So now we know that this track is 92 BPM. So I'm going to go ahead and take the enveloper off there. It doesn't need to be on there anymore. We're going to change the session tempo to 92 temporarily. And actually I'm going to delete that extra bass loop there. I probably would. Actually, no, it'll probably be okay. I'll leave it there. So we're going to temporarily change the session tempo to the native tempo of the loop. We're going to turn on flex time. And just on that loop, we're going to change this to polyphonic mode. If it's not on, make sure that complex mode is on because it'll sound better that way. And then we're going to change the tempo back to the tempo of the bass and the drums. So what this is going to do is just going to put the drums in. It's not going to do anything to the drums. It's going to put the bass back together where it's supposed to be, but it's going to shrink the size of the synth strings because it's going to play back faster. So let's go back to 110. And you can see that the synth strings are now conforming to the tempo of 110. So it's important to make sure that you find the native tempo of the loop, apply flex time while the session has that same tempo, and then go back to the tempo that you actually want to be at, which in our case is 110. So let me mute out the pulse. I'm going to use just bar mode and the marquee tool just to trim this synth string up here and hit Command R to repeat it. Let's see if this sounds like it's in time. So now the synth strings are going a lot faster. All right, let's check out our last instrument here. This is the pulse synth. It sounds like this right now. It's very fast. It's a lot faster than the rest of the session. It does not match up at all. So let's throw the BPM counter on this one. Let's solo it out and listen to it. There we go, 128. So again, we're going to repeat the same process we did with the synth strings. We're going to change the tempo of the session to 128 temporarily. We're going to apply flex time to the pulse synth, polyphonic mode, make sure complex mode is on, and then change the tempo back to 110. So now the pulsing synth will conform to the session tempo. It's only a 2-bar loop, so I'm just gonna do that. I'm gonna hit Command R 3 times, and let's see if that fits in time. Cool. So that's just a quick way to conform your loops to the session tempo using the BPM counter and flex time. So just keep in mind, this isn't going to work for all loops. It'll work for most loops that have transient heavy material. If the transients are sort of lacking in your material, the BPM counter is going to have a hard time figuring out the tempo. And like I said, there's ways around that, like I did with the synth strings, by temporarily adding that envelope plugin on there to sort of bring out the transient material. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and thanks again for watching.